Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to welcome you all to this panel that will focus on COVID-19 and its implications on philanthropy and the broader non-profit and corporate sectors. COVID-19 has impacted negatively on society, its institutions, and the very fabric that holds us together. Philanthropy in its many expressions, and here I include foundations, corporates, individual giving, among others, have been affected greatly. In the most, budgets have been affected, and this might lead to a very conservative approach when it comes to the allocation of resources. But we have also seen a reprioritization of budgets to address the urgent needs around COVID-19. But there's also been progressive responses by philanthropy that include relaxation of funding arrangements in order to allow institutions to pivot to new ways of working. High net worth individuals have been put on the spotlight and are expected to play more substantive roles in response to the pandemic. There's been huge solidarity that has been demonstrated by individuals who have given their time, their skills, their resources to curb the pandemic. We have been here before with the Ebola, the cyclones, and many other pandemics, and we have seen how local communities respond in times of crisis. But we have also seen huge international solidarity that has seen a number of institutions, including high net worth individuals, giving across the continent the many resources that they thought were going to be useful in addressing the pandemic. We will start with Bongiwe Mlangeni. Bongi is the CEO of the Social Justice Initiative based in Johannesburg. Bongi, you work in the social justice space, in particular raising resources to address various elements of social justice. You interface a lot with high net worth individuals. What are the implications on COVID-19 and what does the future hold? I'm handing over to Bongi to reflect on this topic.
Thank you, Peggy, for that introduction, and to UCT for inviting the Social Justice Initiative and myself to speak at this seminar. Peggy, I want to first start, by looking at where we come from. We come from an old normal that was very dysfunctional at many levels. And we were also facing a global systems collapse. At a personal level, people were living with high stress levels. Interpersonal relationships tended to express themselves in a violent manner. In South Africa, driving our high rates of gender-based violence. Communities were fragmented and lacking social cohesion. At a systemic level, we saw deep inequalities, poverty, and unemployment. Institutionally, you will remember that in South Africa, we found ourselves really obsessed by the high rates of corruption and state capture. And in other places in the world, when we just look globally, just before COVID-19 became our main focus, we were experiencing a number of social unrests in over 70 countries. You will remember the social unrest in Hong Kong and in Chile and in many other parts of the world. What were these about? They were mainly about inequities, inequitable access to resources, to rights, and to services. People felt that they were being undermined by a system that was not serving them in the way that it should. How did philanthropy then express itself in that environment? We found that mainly philanthropy tended to be quite charitable, in fact. It did look at addressing immediate needs, and it also tended to respond very well during crisis moments. But mainly it tended to address the personal and community needs. It was less focused on systemic issues and institutional reform that are at the core of people's suffering, driving people's suffering. So even when philanthropy did do good, because there were a number, and there still are a number of institutions, philanthropic institutions, that address issues of human rights and do want to have an impact at a systemic level. But because philanthropy is structured as a system of those who are privileged serving those who are not, it tended to entrench the status quo. And one of the things that made this possible is that to become a philanthropist, you have to have money. It's something you gain by accumulating lots of money. What we had done in the old world, the world that we are coming from, is that we had actually reduced philanthropy to just being about money and less about love for humankind, which is the original understanding of philanthropy. The challenge that we face now is how can we rethink philanthropy and move it from that narrowed down a definition of donation of money to the original meaning of love for humankind, which calls for a recognition of our shared humanity. So what has COVID done now? How is it shaping our current environment? I mean, one of the things that COVID is doing is that we have seen that the earth can actually thrive without human beings. We are the ungrateful guests on this earth. COVID has made us all vulnerable. There is now inclusive vulnerability in the world today. How are the responses? How do philanthropists respond to this? It is a crisis moment for now. The focus is very much on the immediate needs, and there is a lot of charitable giving that is taking place. You will know that in South Africa, the government set up the Solidarity Fund, a short-term measure to address COVID-19. Now, we know, though, that the problems that COVID has exposed, because it has put a spotlight on inequality, those issues have been there before, they have now deepened, and they are going to be with us for a long time. So how can we shift solidarity in such a way that it becomes, how do we shift philanthropy so that philanthropy becomes about solidarity and fosters a transformed society? The solidarity that we are seeing in South Africa right now is currently a top-down approach where governments and the wealthy are seeking to solve the COVID-19 challenges. In an earlier session here, one of my comrades, Nomzamo Zondo from SERI, spoke about an interesting observation that we are seeing civil society and communities being made spectators in the response to COVID-19. Not because they don't have solutions to offer, but because government and those with wealth have excluded them from the table. There are a number of organizations that we as the Social Justice Initiative that we support that are in the human rights space that have actually offered solutions both to the Solidarity Fund and to government. What they want to be involved, but they have been excluded from that table. And we are hoping that we will see a change in this as the crisis deepens, because we are expecting it to deepen. So a solidarity basically that excludes communities and civil society, it begs the question, how will it succeed? And how different would it be from what we have been doing before, where we deepen the inequalities instead of closing the gap? So what do we need? What kind of philanthropy do we need under this environment? It is our view that what we need right now is a collective response that to turn this crisis into an opportunity to undo the deep-seated injustices and build a fairer and more just society. So collective action is necessary and fundamental, and communities have to be at the center of that. So a philanthropy that is about just giving to others and not and is not informed by those communities is no longer a philanthropy that will work going forward in our view. We have to shift philanthropy from being just about money so that it is foregrounded in community and relationships, and a recognition that we are living in an ecosystem where we are the subjects to nature, where nature is actually more powerful than us. Therefore, we can no longer continue living as if we are the super special human species in this world, and we can treat nature in whatever way that we want. We need a philanthropy that supports those who are shaping a just system for society, a philanthropy that focuses on institutional and system reform, and less charitable, but more focused on addressing the root causes of injustice in South Africa and in the rest of the world. I mean, this is a moment which a philanthropist should be grabbing to partner with civil society very closely and communities in finding the solutions that will take us out of this crisis. I'll hand over back to you, Bheki.
Bongi, I just wanted to follow up on what you said, and I would also urge the panelists, if you want to engage, to indicate to me. There's a view that the reason why we are seeing a lot of high net worth individuals, the upper class, the rich responding in big numbers to COVID-19 is simply because their interests are actually threatened. With regards to the other pandemics before, like Ebola, the cyclones, we did not see such a huge response because really it was the poor that were affected. And so because this affects everyone, but in the main it affects the interest of the rich, we are seeing this huge response. I mean, what's your view on that, and what have you been picking up on the ground as you work with high net worth individuals?
Well, I think it is true. I mean, like I said earlier, that we're having this inclusive vulnerability, and therefore people are looking for solutions. But I think it will take a long time for those who are wealthy and privileged to actually bring themselves to the level of just recognizing just how connected we are as a society, and engage communities and civil society in a manner that shifts even the way philanthropy is done. For now, the focus is very much on a crisis. It's focused on this crisis moment, and people want to just move out of this. But the social injustices that are there have to be at the center. In my view right now, for many of the wealthy and those who are in positions of authority and privilege, this is not something that is being highly prioritized at this point because they're focusing on the crisis itself. So issues, for instance, around redistribution of wealth and ensuring that we tackle the root causes are not something that is the main focus at this point. And I think it is our job as civil society to come out there and make this a priority right now. There are a number of organizations. So for instance, some organizations are proposing that we should rethink, the food economy in South Africa and have a more inclusive food economy. And they have come up with suggestions on how this can be done. Even the food distribution that has been happening right now in South Africa, which started off by excluding communities, now communities are coming back because they are better positioned to do those kind of things. So I think that what this moment is likely to do, especially in terms of how high net worth individuals think about philanthropy, is to recognize the importance of forming partnerships with communities and working closely with them, and let communities drive the solutions.
Thank you, Bong. I have just one more question, then we'll move to the next panelist. We saw Jack Ma responding with a huge gift to Africa, in fact, to all the 54-55 countries. Mm-hmm. Why take Jack Ma and not one of our own to actually do that?
Well, that's it. It's a difficult one to answer, Peggy. But I do find that our philanthropists, like I said, they do tend to focus on the individual and community, and not so much on the systemic and institutional issues. And I think that's a focus that will need to shift. There is also, in my view, an over-reliance on government solving problems. And philanthropies are not taking the opportunity to become catalysts for greater change. And they could do that. So there are limitations, I think, in terms of philanthropists wanting to protect relationships with government, and I think partially it's good that they want to work with their governments, but this focus on what is the big thing that can be done in the continent and be a catalyst for change is something that we wish more philanthropists could do. And I'm not saying they are not doing it at all, but I think they could do more in that space. I mean, we have seen, it will be unfair because you have the Dangote foundations and a few other foundations that are doing fantastic work. And I think we have to recognize the efforts that they are making.
Maybe I can also pose a question that has been posted here. Is the pandemic not an opportunity for us to begin having a conversation with high net worth individuals, as well as corporates who are sitting on huge amounts of money and resources, to commit to giving back to society, either through legislation or through incentives?
It's true, in my view, that corporates in particular can do a lot more if there was legislation supporting increase corporate social giving to social justice work. So our corporates in South Africa give a lot. I think last year the statistics were around 8 to 10 billion that was donated by corporates in South Africa. And this money, these amounts increase at a rate of about 5 to 7% every year. So they are doing a lot. Most of the funding, though, goes towards education and social welfare, old age homes and children's homes. It does not yet address the systemic issues. So we're seeing, and even in the education space, it's mainly about issuing bursaries. But in a society that is as unequal as ours, you cannot ignore issues that drive why we have high rates of poverty, why we have high rates of GBV. So we have been advocating together with others to see if we can influence corporates to see if we can have some kind of regulation introduced that increases the amounts of corporate social investment to social justice work that is being undertaken in the country. In terms of philanthropists, it is my view that the wealthy should be taxed more, that there are grounds for introducing a wealth tax in South Africa so that we can see more distribution of funds and go towards the promotion of well-being, especially now where government is increasing the social grant system. I mean, not long ago, they introduced the regulation or a policy that people who are unemployed between 18 and 59 can receive a social grant, and they're getting about 350 per month. And this is a temporary measure, the way it has been crafted for now. In our view, this should be something that is long-term, and the amounts must increase so that we are able to cover many of the people in South Africa who are living below the poverty line. And this can be done by actually introducing a wealth tax. So these are areas where, in my view, we need to advocate more and ensure that we can influence government to actually take these measures. COVID definitely does open up the space for those kinds of initiatives.
Okay, so the first question was, is it realistic to expect governments and the wealthy to embrace inclusivity? Are we expecting too much from them?
It's a question I have asked myself many times, because human beings do tend to act out of self-interest, and that does not mean they cannot be altruistic in their actions, but self-interest does matter a lot. And the expectations of government, I think, are correct, because people who are in government, they are in the service of society. They are contracting with society to do to promote the social well-being of society. And they are bound by laws to act in the interest of society. And that's why a vibrant civil society is always so useful and necessary to hold leaders accountable. And then on the wealthy side, the individuals, I think that, again, the question that was asked earlier about laws that will compel the wealthy individuals and corporates to act and improve, let's say, improve their actions towards citizens, being a good corporate citizens. I think they're absolutely necessary if we want to see change. In my view, it is going to be very difficult to have an expectation that does not come with obligations alongside it, that does not come with laws that can be enforced or regulations that can be enforced, and in a way empowering society to hold both those who are, whether in government or in the corporate or as high net worth individuals, accountable in the way they behave.
The second question is, does philanthropy regard itself as impactful? How is it measured? What do you think is the future of philanthropy will look like in South Africa post-COVID-19?
The Wits University now has a center that Bongiwe is running that is looking at philanthropy in the continent. I mean, this is something that is developing. We still have a lot to do in terms of just doing research around philanthropy and documenting how we practice philanthropy as Africans and the value that it brings. But in addition to that, philanthropy in South Africa has mainly been measured, for instance, in terms of how much it contributes. What is missing is what impact it has on the beneficiaries. And I think that those studies, we don't have sufficient data on that. It's something that still needs to be done. Most of the data that we have, even with corporate social investments or the study that is being done by Nedbank on high net worth individuals, which shows that philanthropists contributed close to about 6 billion in 2018, 2019, if I'm not mistaken. You can check those figures. But that study, again, does not tell us about the impact. It does tell us where the investments go, but we don't know if philanthropy is actually shifting the needle in any way. And it is something that definitely has to be done so that we can see, are people giving just to serve and enhance their social status and amplify their influence, or are they giving to really bring the change that is needed? There's a big question mark on that topic. What is the future of philanthropy post-COVID? I know that we tend to speak about post-COVID as if it's something that is going to happen soon. And it is very likely that we are going to be in COVID for a very long time, because we don't know when we're going to come out of this. For me, it's important to think about how we can shift philanthropy now so that when we reach the so-called post-COVID, we have already planted seeds in the way philanthropy operates. So to answer the question about what is the future of philanthropy, I think I addressed this earlier when I presented, that the future of philanthropy is in connecting with communities and being driven by solutions that come from communities, that there has to be some form of bridging the gap. And I don't know how this would happen. So for instance, the Solidarity Fund that government has created, could it perhaps be a catalyst for a kind of philanthropy that will shift how we give and also how we enhance social well-being in South Africa? I mean, that is still a question mark.
How do social justice activists manage the reality that we may exist in an initiative that only pushes or addresses social justice as long as it is in the initiative's best interest and not the ultimate beneficiaries? So that's the first question. The second question is, it says corporate and high net worth individuals are privy to tax holidays and have over the years enjoyed decreased tax rates. South Africa's response in terms of the social relief is unsustainable, and the situation at community level is already volatile. What kind of advocacy and lobbying efforts are acknowledging the realities for the poor and the benefits that are enjoyed by the rich, so that we can close this gap? And then the last question for now is, instead of taking funds out of foundations and trusts during the COVID period, how does philanthropy actually think or build up NGOs and NPOs to run better post-COVID?
So if you look at civil society in South Africa and the quest for social justice, this is something that South Africans have been pursuing for years. That is during apartheid and post-apartheid. So this is not about an initiative. This is about a South Africa that has a constitution that commits itself to social justice, and social justice is something that we don't have as yet in South Africa. Civil society also in South Africa has been able to achieve a lot more with limited resources. We know that post-1994, we saw a decline in funding for civil society. So that shows that the people who are in the social justice fight, the people who want to promote accountability and ensure that South Africa's democracy succeeds, they do it whether there is money or no money. And I'm not here trying to reduce the importance of money. I am just basically emphasizing that what drives the movement is actually this belief that society can be equitable, this belief that resources can be accessed in an equitable manner. And it is not always just an issue of money and serving interest. I think that I was just covering that first question about being caught up in an initiative that serves self-interest rather than the beneficiaries. I truly believe that South Africa's civil society has its heart at the right place. Then to answer the second question about the kind of investments that we see happening now and the fact that they're unsustainable, I agree with the person who posed that question, that it is unsustainable. I think the danger that we are facing right now is that so much funding is going towards COVID and not to other areas. And I think there's a big danger there, because while COVID, yes, is the crisis right now, there is a whole lot more in South Africa that actually matters, that also still needs to be addressed. And definitely it is unsustainable. I mean, if you look at the fact that the Solidarity Fund, which is a short-term intervention actually addressing long-term problems, the fact that it has, in a way, and I don't think this is intentional, but centralized funding is attracting a lot of philanthropic funding towards itself. And what is that money being used for? It is being used to procure services, to buy PPEs, to drive a communication strategy, and and also covered that food response, the food distribution response, which to my understanding was a once-off. What happens after the Solidarity Fund? Where would all these philanthropists that have now moved their resources into that fund, what would be, the next phase? Would funding still be available for other things? I want to believe, yes, it will be available, but it is something, I think this question is so important to recognize that there is something unsustainable in the way that we are doing things right now. To answer the last question about philanthropic foundations and how they support nonprofits, could they help them run better? This is such a fundamental, big question. Right now, a number of community organizations, especially the ones that are at the forefront, they have to deal with a lot. There are a lot of emotional issues that are emerging. It is interesting to find out, are foundations actually supporting activists, providing, mental wellness support, supporting in other ways as well, to enable those who are on the front line to be actually stronger to deal with some of the issues that they have to tackle. But I also know that previously, a number of donors have been coming together and they have looked at different ways in which they can support civil society. There are issues around boards, how boards operate and the impact of boards on organizations. There are issues around, executive managers and how well equipped they are. But some of the big issues is that in South Africa, we're seeing a sector that is changing face. We're seeing young Black leaders coming on board, and those leaders, they have, they need access to power, they need access to money, access to networks. So much more still needs to be done to ensure that non-profit organizations, because non-profit organizations are part of civil society, and they play an important role in civil society, that non-profit organizations are strengthened so that they can become more effective in what they do. So in a nutshell, basically, a lot more still needs to be done to ensure that we empower organizations on the ground to do more and to do better.
We haven't spoken a lot about technology, the fourth industrial revolution, and how it's likely to either assist in pivoting to the new normal or pose a threat in many ways. And so I'm thinking here about the ways in which we are going to design our institutions, the platforms that we're going to put in place in order to do our work, but also some of the processes and systems around AI and among others that we can use for resource mobilization. Could you take just a few minutes to reflect on the role that technology might play in assisting us to move into the new normal?
Yeah, this is an area that, in my view, civil society in particular has not paid enough attention to. In the funding space, though, we have thought, when cryptocurrency became the new game, and we, blockchain, there was much talk about blockchain. We did, in our space, try to understand more about what does this mean in terms of fundraising, because the Social Justice Initiative is fundraising on one side, and on the other side, we are a donor. So we have looked at, is it possible that the fundraising space will actually shift more into the space of cryptocurrency and using blockchain as a form of fundraising, and how those systems could enhance or let me say help to develop trust between the donor and the beneficiary this time being non-governmental organizations that are in the social justice space, which is our focus. So it's an area that we see there is a great possibility that things could move in that direction. But there are also concerns about how this technology could disrupt the civil society space in the way it operates. For instance, for professionals, is there still a need to, and COVID has just done this for us, is there still a need for us to be in offices, mobilization, for instance, so is there a need for us to be in offices? We can see now we are working at home. We are using a digital platform ourselves to connect. Lots of mobilization right now is happening digitally. How do we support that? It's raising also a lot of issues in terms of access, who accesses the digital space and who doesn't. So as AI, I think, develops and starts to occupy in a more forceful way the spaces, and I understand that AI is way beyond what I'm talking about right now. But just in general, as technology enters our spaces fully, there is a lot of disruption that's, in my view, civil society is not yet ready to deal with, and needs to prepare itself for that. So this moment, in a way, just as an introduction of what is possible, the fact that under lockdown, we've had to mobilize using digital platforms, and we could see the kind of inequities that creates, is a good start in terms of understanding what it needs, what is it that is needed for the future, what happens when other new technologies come on board. Then there are also issues around surveillance of people. Are we having a civil society that is ready to ensure accountability in the way governments are using surveillance systems? What does it mean in terms of our rights and further curtailment of our freedoms? Because already they have been curtailed. So there are big issues that are emerging out of this space, and it will be, it's a conversation and it's an area that we need to think through as we move forward.